Good morning, guys. You know what time it is. It's time for tactics. Hey, so in this one, we're playing white, and black's pawn just moved from G7 to G6. Let's do material count first and see what's going on. So I have 7 pawns. Black has 7 pawns. I have 2 rooks and a queen. Black has 2 rooks and a queen. And I have a knight, and black has a bishop. So let's take a deeper dive now into what's going on. So always start with the most obvious move first and run down that rabbit hole until it either works out or doesn't work out. And then we branch off from there. So immediately, like our knight on F5 is being attacked, right? So let's look at moving it, which would be the obvious move, to maybe, I don't know, G7 with check and see what that does for us. So if I go knight G7 check, what would black do? Black would have to move their king either to F7, E7, or D8. So let's just pick one of those 3 and see if that works out. So we're just going to trial and error this thing until we get it correct. So knight to G7 check, king to F7, and what would our follow-up be if he were to go to F7? I mean, we could try taking the pawn on F6 with check, but that would not be very smart because he could just take back with the queen. Queen takes F6, rook takes F6, and king takes F6, and we don't really gain anything. So, or do we? Because let me run through that line real quick. Knight G7 check, king F7, rook sacks on F6 with check, queen takes F6, rook takes F6 check, king takes F6, and maybe our queen gets into the game with like queen to F3 check, but then he would just take our knight with king takes G7. So I don't think that's it, guys, just because black gets away, we don't gain anything. We just basically sacked 2 rooks for a queen and didn't gain anything. So let's alter the sequence and see if that changes anything. So maybe inserting our queen onto F3 with check first before we follow up with rook takes F6. So what I mean is knight G7 check, king F7, rook sacks on F6 with check, queen takes F6, and it doesn't really work, does it? Queen doesn't gain anything by going to F3 because then black's queen would just trade off on F3. And then rook takes F3. So that we don't gain anything. So we know it's not rook takes F6 if you were to go to king F7. So I'm not thinking that's even a good follow-up for white, like knight to G7 check. Because, I mean, even just a simple king to F7 kind of diffuses any sort of attack for white. So that's how my mind looks at this problem. So maybe instead of knight to G7 check, what if we sacked on D6? Let's play with that for a second. Knight takes D6 check, and let's say his queen just took back. Queen takes D6. Then what? Well, we could push our pawn to E5. And the reason I'm looking at that is because, like, we just sacked our knight on D6, right? So we kind of cleared the way on the F file. Now look at the relationship of our rooks. The rooks are in a battery. So knight takes D6 check, queen takes D6, E5 would be a great move because if queen took on E5, then we could simply pin the queen to the king with rook to E4 because black's queen would be pinned to its king. You see that? So that's if he takes with the queen. So we have to consider, what if he doesn't take with the queen? What if he takes with the pawn? So now we got to make sure this is ironclad before we even make the first move. So that's how you want to be doing these puzzles. You don't want to just think of one solution and then go with it. Like, you have to think, how is my opponent going to respond to my threats, my captures, and my attacks? So checks, captures, threats is what it's called. So knight takes D6 check, queen takes D6, e5. Now I know what he's going to do. If he takes back with the queen, we're just going to pin it. So what if he takes f takes e5? So f takes e5 would be met with, oh, look at that, because we have our battery, right, on the f file. Now I want to take his rook on f8 with check, but look, he does have two defenders. His queen that's now on d6 would defend that rook on f8, and the king on e8 also defends the rook on f8. So we don't want to take with that yet. What we want to do, because we pushed e5, right? Our queen now attacks the g6 pawn. So we throw in what's called an in-between move, or a Zwischenzug, which is a German word for in-between move. And I probably totally butchered the pronunciation of that, but I apologize to you Germans out there. So we'll start from the top. Knight takes d6 check. Queen takes d6. e5. Now we know what happens if he takes with the queen. So we're going to consider, we've already calculated that line. We're going to consider what we do if he takes with the pawn. So f takes e5. Now we take the g6 pawn with queen takes g6 check. And, oh, interestingly, if he takes with the f6 pawn, I just noticed this. If he takes with the f6 pawn, his queen that's on d6 also defends the g6 pawn. But that doesn't stop my ideas, because this is probably going to be a deflection tactic, I'm thinking, because like that queen that's on d6 defends the rook on f8, right? So it can't do both. It can't defend both the f8 rook and the g6 pawn. So what we want to do is deflect the defender. So remove the defender off one of either the rook on f8 or the pawn on g6. And so how we do that is by taking one of these pieces and then taking the other piece that the queen can no longer defend. So that's the concept. So knight takes d6, queen takes d6, e5, f takes e5, and let's just play with rook takes f8 first. Rook takes f8 check, and queen takes f8, let's say. Queen takes f8, and now we can go queen takes g6 check. So in that case, the queen would not want to block our check from g6 by moving to f7, because we would just take it. We would just win black's queen. So he'd probably have to move his king to either d8 or e7. So we got to consider both of those in this line. So let's say he goes king to d8. Well, then he just loses the queen. Our rook on f1 just takes the queen on f8 with check. So we know that's not it for black. What if he goes king to e7, because he still maintains defensive f8? If that's the case, then what would our follow-up be? That's what we have to figure out. Maybe, well, then we're simply going to just try to detach the king from the defense of the queen. So I'm looking at like maybe queen to h7 check. And he wouldn't want to go to d8, because then we would just win the queen with a rook with check. But he wouldn't have to do that. He could go king to d6 and just try to run away that way. King to d6. But I mean, then we do win the queen. So rook takes f8, rook takes f8. And is that enough? I mean, in that exchange, we basically lost a knight and a rook for a queen. So I do think that's a good exchange. I mean, like, that's a good sequence. So let's start from the top so we don't get too far into the weeds. Knight takes d6 check. Queen takes d6. We know what happens after we push e5 if he takes with the queen. We're just going to pin it with rook to e4. So we're considering him not taking with the queen. He's going to take with the pawn. So we pushed e5. F takes e5. Queen, oh no, we went with rook takes f8 check first. Rook takes f8 check. Queen takes f8. Queen takes g6 check. King e7, because if he goes king d8, we're just going to take the queen on f8 with check. So king e7, and then we considered queen to h7 check, because we're trying to detach the king's defense from the queen. So then king goes to d6, because again, if he goes d8, we're just going to take the queen on f8 with check. So king to d6, and then we looked at queen, or our rook taking the queen on f8, and then his rook on a8 would take back on f8. So, I mean, we really simplify the position there. He's left with a rook and a bishop, and we're left with a queen. So, I mean, that looks pretty good, honestly, in that line. I would accept going into an endgame with a queen versus two pieces. So that looks pretty good. Let's go back from the top and just make sure that we didn't overlook something. This is what you want to do, like in the game, over the board game. Make sure you didn't overlook something. And then we also have another line that we got to calculate, guys. So in the Tactics with Trav channel, we basically calculate everything. Because when you're over the board in a game, you can't make a willy-nilly move and it doesn't work out. And you're like, oh, I didn't calculate that variation. Like, you need to calculate everything to make sure that we are ironclad when it comes to an actual game. So starting from the top, knight takes d6 check, queen takes d6, e5, f takes e5. Now we looked at rook taking on f8 with check, so we didn't look at this one, which is queen takes g6 check to deflect the queen away, and see if that could be it. I don't know if it is or isn't, but we're going to trial and error this thing. So instead of taking on f8 with check, we're going to take the g6 pawn with check. So queen takes g6 check, and then queen takes g6, and then rook takes f8 check, and see if that makes a difference. Rook takes f8 check, king to e7. And I don't think that does it, guys. I don't think that does it, because there's no follow-up. I mean, there's nothing. We just basically sack our queen on g6 for nothing. So I do think it's rook takes f8 check in that first line that we calculated. So starting from the top to keep it clean without all my commentary, knight takes d6 check, queen takes d6, e5. We know he's not going to take back with a queen because he's going to get pinned on e4, rook e4. So he takes back he takes back with the f pawn. F takes e5. Rook takes f8 check. Queen takes f8. Queen takes g6 check. King to e7. Rook takes f8 check. Or rook takes f8 check. King. Rook takes f8. So yeah, I mean, we basically go into an endgame, guys, with a queen versus a rook and a bishop. So I'm just going to make the move now that we've done our calculations. I'm comfortable with going into an endgame with a queen versus two pieces. So I'm just going to make the move. Knight takes d6, check and see if it's right. Knight takes d6. Yep, that's right. So queen took on d6. And our follow-up was e5. Yep, that's right. Queen took. Oh, interesting. So after I pushed e5, and the computer took on e5. So that's the easier line from what we calculated. Now we calculated taking on, or just pinning the queen to the king. Now let's double check that real quick, because looking at that g6 pawn, like, what if we took queen takes g6 check? Is that good? I don't think it is, because now we would lose our pin. So, like, if you're thinking that it's tempting to take the g6 pawn, I think it's a blunder, because if queen takes g6 with check, the king would move to like d8, and then you don't have a follow-up. Then you can't go rook e4 because it doesn't pin the queen to anything. So I'm just going to make the move rook to e4 that we calculated earlier. That's right, and he took the rook. And we're going to take back with check. Queen takes e4. All right, that's it, guys. So +6 That's a 22-26 rated puzzle at a 62.7% pass rate. Pretty good pass rate for you guys. So good job. And moving on to the next.